Municipalities are the closest to local communities, and they're tasked mainly with the development and the provision of services. Waste management has been a contentious issue among communities, the lamenting the lack of refuse removal. What does the Constitution say about waste removal, and why are municipalities not delivering on this? We have the director at the Third Republic and municipal expert, Paul Berkowitz. He joins us to chat more on this. Good morning to you, Paul. Thank you for joining us. The contentious issue of waste removal seems to be rampant across the country. Just last week, we heard of what is happening in the city of Tshwane with disgruntled waste collection service providers fighting with the new people that had been contracted to do so, and of course affecting the residents there. How can we get around this issue, particularly now with the issue of food poisoning?
Morning, Audrey. Thanks for having me. Yes, refuse removal is one of the 4 basic services that is the local government's responsibility, and it has been for pretty much the last 25 years. It's not in the Constitution, only the provision of water is, but there's been a development of laws and bylaws and regulations over the last 25 years. And municipalities are responsible for electricity, water, refuse removal and sanitation. They get money from national government to do this, but I think it's common cause and common knowledge that service delivery failures have just been mounting and increasing, particularly over the last few years since the 2021 local government election.
And it's quite concerning that it has literally become a life or death issue, particularly for residents that stay in your high density suburbs, your townships, because of the number of people that are there and the issue of sanity. What do you think could be happening in the value chain when it comes to getting contractors, perhaps from the private sector with government, municipalities, to ensure that this happens? Is it a governance issue? Is it corruption? What could be the issue?
It is a government issue. We have seen increasingly that the private sector is entering into partnerships in some municipalities. Tshwane quite publicly asked for private sector input for many of the smaller non-basic service delivery issues like cutting grass and keeping verges clean. But it's squarely the responsibility of government. If the private sector and other stakeholders want to help, they can, but it doesn't absolve government of its responsibilities. Now, the reason for the service delivery failures, there are quite a few contributing factors, Audrey, but it does come down to, if not direct corruption, then a lot of financial mismanagement. So, for example, in Johannesburg, we've had billing problems with the municipality for years, for more than a decade. But things are starting to bite now because the whole country is poor. The money that's transferred from national government, from the treasury to local government, isn't enough anymore. Municipalities, the coalitions and the parties in charge are still wasting money. And we are seeing the direct consequences and effect now, whereas service delivery failures used to be more common among the smaller municipalities that didn't have a tax base or money. The metros are being hit just as hard now because the lack of financial reserves, the growth in financial mismanagement, the lack of accountability, these are the biggest contributing factors.
So what I hear you say is there's also funding issues with the way the money is allocated, perhaps in the budget when they get into council and where this money should be allocated. But is there perhaps barriers when it comes to the kind of people that are contracted to do this work? I was just looking at some of the requirements, the rules that the vehicles have to be new, they have to be roadworthy. Of course, there's a basic things that you would expect a company to have in terms of the vehicles that they choose. Is that something that could be a barrier?
It could be a barrier, Audrey, but I still think based on the evidence, and it's quite overwhelming. I'll give you another example. In Ekurhuleni, sometime over the last 5-10 years, there was an effort to develop local contractors and local businesses to do the waste management work. There were a number of companies, some bigger that would have the required capital expenditure to buy the big waste trucks that you'd need, and then smaller contractors as well. But that contract was largely shot through with corruption. most of those businesses weren't sustainable. The smaller contractors that were part of the bigger project complained they weren't getting paid on time. Money went missing. And yes, it is ultimately the municipality's responsibility. Whether they want to spend the money and their grants in-house and buy the vehicles themselves and run the service entirely within the municipality with public servants, or if they want to go into partnership with private contractors as part of a job creation scheme, that doesn't matter. But neither of those options are working, and it's still the municipality's responsibility. With regards to the money that they get, yes, the whole country is under pressure. The budget is stretched thin, but we've also seen over a number of years that money gets wasted. When the city of Johannesburg back in 2006, 2007 was taken to the Constitutional Court because they were asked to provide more free basic water, one of their defenses was they didn't have the money. But the same year they decided to spend 45 million rand on hosting the Miss World pageant. Now, the money that National Treasury transfers specifically for subsidizing basic service delivery, specifically for poorer households and people who can't afford it, is in the equitable share. And that is an unconditional grant, meaning the municipalities can spend that money however they see fit. They should. It's earmarked for basic service delivery. But the reality is that they'll spend it on anything and then complain that there's not enough money to do the basic part of their job.
And we're talking of constitutional rights here. You mentioned this as we started our conversation, that it's enshrined within the Constitution that municipalities have the legislative competence to be able to do this job. And this is Section 146 of the Constitution. Is there some kind of legal recourse that can be taken, perhaps by civic society or residents themselves, citizens, to ensure that this is taken care of?
It is a little complicated, Audrey. The only one of the free basic services that's enshrined in the Constitution is the provision of water. That's in Section 27, where the Constitution says that there must be progressive steps to provide adequate water. And that was the whole basis of the court case that went to the Constitutional Court in 2007, 2008, the so-called Mazibuko water case. In the end, the Constitutional Court found in favor of the municipalities. They weren't required to provide more than the 6 and in some cases 9 megaliters per household per month. So it's even harder to appeal to the Constitution for the other basic services, for electricity, for refuse removal, for sanitation. There have been some legal amendments, such as the amendment a few years ago to the National Audit Act, which said that if a municipal official or someone in public service is found to directly be responsible for financial mismanagement or wasteful expenditure, they can be held personally liable. But and a case has been brought against officials in Nelson Mandela Bay. But that is recent, and then that comes after a number of years of the law being in place. So, short answer to your question, is there more we could do? Yes. But it doesn't seem that government and the public sector is interested in solving the problem or has a sense of urgency. And even though we've passed laws that should make it easier to hold government accountable, they're not really being enforced.
Implementation of the rules and the laws that already exist. I'm sure you heard the president's speech when he was talking of some of the remedies that they want to employ as government, one of those being awareness campaigns with communities on how to use rat poison, or just making sure that it's used correctly, or eliminating it from communities altogether. Do you think that that is enough? Just a few minutes ago, I don't know if you heard, when we're talking to my colleague Katlego, who's speaking to spaza shop owners who have those kind of issues, saying that they need more time with regards to registering their spaza shops, some of the rules that have been put in place now. Did you think that is a comprehensive solution to the issue that we're seeing?
Audrey, I think we are being hopeful because we are talking about these fixes at the edge. We're talking about putting a bandage on an open wound. We're talking about all these cliches, being the ambulance at the bottom of the hill when people have already sped down and crashed. It is still government's responsibility. The fact that people are resorting to rat poison and other things to control vermin is just a symptom of the fact that government's not doing its job. We shouldn't have water tankers because our water infrastructure has collapsed, and yet we do. And we know that in many municipalities, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, there is the so-called water tanker mafia. So these fixes and these makeshift solutions aren't even working because we're not addressing the root problem. We don't have a responsive, accountable government at local government, and it is getting worse. And it is their job, and it is quite unfair and a little bit, I don't know what the word is, hypocritical, sanctimonious, unfeeling for government to say, this is what you should do to fix the problem because we're not doing our job properly.
We talk of capacitation of municipalities. A lot of what we hear is that there just simply isn't the manpower to be able to do inspections and to implement some of these laws that already exist. As a municipal expert, what do you think is the immediate issue or top priority that municipalities need to look at going forward?
Audrey, I think we're still talking about addressing the symptoms because we're now focusing on accrediting personnel to check spaza shops and to make sure that rat poison is being used correctly. Again, if local government was doing its job properly, we wouldn't need private citizens to go buy rat poison with their own money to control a pest, a vermin problem that results from a breakdown in basic service delivery. If we can hold government accountable, if government can hold itself accountable, if government can do its job properly, we wouldn't have to worry about all these downstream solutions that shouldn't be the responsibility of normal communities and private citizens. Government must do its job.
Government must do its job. Thank you, Paul, for your insights.